One of these days I'm going to get my life together. 2 Kings chapter 4 is where we are tonight. 2 Kings chapter 4. You know, I thought Dwayne Key had a great idea. You know, we had to watch him. He led singing, looking this way. And so I have this idea for Sunday, since what happens is when you sit in the back, the coolness from the breezeways and things move in. But when you sit up front, the heat, that's where the heat is. And then when you step up on the stage, that's 5 degrees hotter. So the closer we sit to the front, the warmer we will become. And so I'm okay if I can stand right back there and everybody else come and just turn their back around and look the other way. All right, we're in, as we said, 2 Kings 4. We're looking at this section of Kings started in chapter 17, this kings versus prophets, so to speak, where you see Elijah and Ahab pretty much dominating the narrative from 1 Kings 17 to 22, although we run into some unnamed prophets and Micaiah in chapter 22. And then we see Elijah ascend to heaven in the first part of chapter 2, and Elisha is his new successor, the one taking his place. Now, what we're looking at from 2:12 really all the way to chapter 6 at least, is we're looking at the ways in which Elijah or Elisha is being confirmed as the new prophet, okay? So Elijah, you remember Elisha asked him for a double portion of his spirit before he ascended back into heaven. And he was asking basically to kind of be the next prophet. We have schools of prophets, the sons of the prophets, and so you have a lot of prophets that are in the nation at that particular time, but Elijah was kind of the dean. He was kind of the leader of those prophets, the one everybody went to, and Elisha is wanting to take that position. And of course, he's been groomed for that position. And so everything that we read from that point forward is showing us in some way how he is just like Elijah, if not in some ways more productive than Elijah was, okay? So when you look at chapter 2, he goes, and you remember he takes it, when they were going across the Jordan River for Elijah to ascend, Elijah takes his garment and he slaps the water, touches the water, and it divides for them to walk over, okay? Now, the sons of the prophets are watching this. These school of the prophets, these young prophets in this guild, are watching this. And when Elisha comes back across, what does he do? He takes Elijah's mantle, strikes it, and walks across. That's a way of him succeeding Elijah. Okay? Now, we watch that even further in verses 19 through 22, when the men of Jericho come to him about that situation with their water. And the city of Jericho was a city that had been cursed by God in Joshua chapter 6, rebuilt in the reign of Omri and Ahab that we read about in 1 Kings chapter 16. And he now blesses it with good water, and Jericho becomes an important city in the New Testament. And so there you see his prophetic power to pronounce blessings. Then we ran upon this troubling story upon first glance, but as you look a little bit deeper, it actually makes a lot of sense. But he goes to Bethel, the center of the calf worship that Jeroboam has set up. And there he curses young men who taunt him. And basically, not just because they taunt him, but because they're taunting God. He's God's representative. And so you see his prophetic ministry is being confirmed because first, in the eyes of the prophets, the other prophets, then he's able to confer a blessing upon a city. He's also able to confer a curse upon a group of people. And then you come to chapter 3, which we did online last week. Has that only been last week? I feel like it's been 10 years. Anyway, I can't keep up with the days of the week anymore. So in chapter 3, Elisha is confirmed amongst kings. So you remember they go to war with Moab. So you have the king of the north, the new king of the north, which is Jehoram. And then you have the king of the south, who is Jehoshaphat, that went to war with Ahab, Jehoram's father. And then they are joined by the king of Edom, who was most likely a subject king. And so kind of out of loyalty, he goes to war with them. And then they go to war with Moab, and they go and they meet with Elisha. And so Elisha is basically confirmed and shown to be the prophet that should be sought out amongst kings, okay? Now, where we come to tonight in chapter 4, Elisha is going to perform a series of miracles. And actually, for these next few chapters, he's going to be performing a series of miracles. Now, what he's doing specifically when we look at chapter 4, the miracles that he performs should cause us to remember something in the ministry of Elijah, okay? Because, again, this is him confirming, God confirming that he is Elijah's successor. And so you'll see and should probably have some flashbacks to Elijah's ministry as we watch some of these miracles unfold. Now, that's what's going on in the book. Now, as we think about it on a more practical level, one of the things you see about Elijah is the compassion of the prophets. I came across something in reading in preparation for this, and a lot of people in preaching and teaching will say when they have something hard to say, or which pretty much sometimes for some people is anything they ever say, they just seem like they're angry all the time about something. They'll say, I'm just speaking like one of the prophets. You must not be reading the same prophets I'm reading. Yeah, they had some hard things to say. But those prophets were men of compassion. They loved their people. They did things. They went to the nth degree to take care of them, as we're going to see here with Elisha. He's going to go to the ends of the earth to be able to take care of people and to meet their needs on the smallest of levels. And so we learned something about compassion. And we also learned something that, God is interested in even the smallest portion or detail of our lives. Sometimes I've heard people say, why would you pray about that? God doesn't care. Like, that's too small for him. I'm just not really sure where that comes from. Because God is concerned with every single little thing that goes on in this world. Down to, I can't find my car keys. He knows that's going on. Okay? And so it should change the way that we pray and we think about our troubles. Because sometimes we turn prayer into kind of like a 911 service. And we do that in multiple ways. Sometimes we only use it when we need it. We feel like we need it. At other times, we'll only talk to God, we'll only ask things of God if they're big things. If they're big emergencies, then we'll go and talk to him. But for other little things, we think, why bother him? He's not bothered by it. He's not in the least bothered by it. Okay? Drew and Connor are at the age where they talk a lot. And Reed is not quite there yet, but he'll catch up soon. And they talk a lot. And they come and talk to me about a lot of things that have gone on and what's going on in the day and what animal they've seen and what he's doing and why he's the biggest and baddest and whatever. Something I've never done to them when they're doing that? I've never told them I've got something more important than you. Why? Because they're my kids. I care about them. There's no portion of their life that is not concerning to me. That is, that I don't have any interest in. I want to make sure they're taken care of. And so once we understand, and this is a biblical premise Jesus uses in the Sermon on the Mount, right? He says, if you being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more does God know how to do that? So, if you can look at something that simple and reason it, we take an interest in what our kids have to say, even though half the time we may not understand exactly what they're saying. How much more does God take an interest in it when he understands everything? And so this chapter does some things, at least in my mind when you look at it, that help us see some of those principles. So let's begin. So you have a series of 4 miracles in this particular chapter. Let's begin with verse 1. It says, "Now the wife of one of the sons of the prophets." Now remember, we said the sons of the prophets are that school of the prophets, or that the guild of the prophets where they would be trained. In the book of Amos, Amos will say, "I was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet." Okay? What he's saying is not, my dad wasn't a prophet. I'm not a prophet, and neither was my dad. He's saying, I wasn't a prophet, and I wasn't trained formally in the schools of the prophets. That's what he's saying, okay? Even though that, and I'm not a saying Nazi. If somebody uses that saying that says, I'm not a scholar nor the son of a scholar, talking about their dad or something along those lines, I'm not going to come across and say, you're using it wrong. You know, you don't have to be an annoying person. Just know what it really means, and then to understand it within its context. And so here she is. She's the wife of one of the prophets, and she cried to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, but the creditor has come to take away my 2 children to be his slaves." Okay, so her husband dies. This is a widow. Jewish tradition says that this was Obadiah. 1 Kings chapter 18, you remember that? The man who served Ahab, who hid 100 of the prophets, 50 in one cave and 50 in another. And they go on to say that this debt that he owes is because he took out loans in order to feed all the prophets during that time. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I'm going to say it's not probable. Okay, I just don't see that being likely here. First of all, there's no indication when we meet him that he is a prophet. There's no way that if Ahab knows that Obadiah is a prophet of God, that he lets him live. He's trying to kill them all. Okay? Which makes me think about something else, just kind of sidebar for a second. We have to understand that there is a difference between something being possible and something being probable. Okay? We understand this in everyday life, but sometimes we don't when we bring it to things of religion. Okay? Let's say you're going in for a simple surgery of some kind where you have to be put under. What is one of the possibilities that can happen when you are put under anesthesia? You don't wake up. But is it probable? Okay, now, when we talk about things of religion, sometimes when we talk about will God hold certain sins accountable, will he? And people say, well, it's possible that he won't. Well, I may not necessarily even agree that it's possible that he won't. But what we need to be saying is what is probable. Not what is possible. We don't hide out in gray areas of possibility. A lot of things are possible. Few things are probable. And so when we're dealing with some of these interpretations, you have to kind of sift through some of those things. But nonetheless, here she is, and she is in debt. How she got into debt, we don't know. Her husband, obviously, it seems like, created the debt, whether it was at his farm or something along that line. But the creditor has come to take away her 2 children, because that was something that could be done in that particular time. It was not looked upon favorably. You remember in Nehemiah, when we studied there in chapter 5, that was one of the big issues that Nehemiah had to confront them about, was they were charging interest on their loans and then enslaving the people and taking over their lands, and they were doing this to each other. And so that kind of helps us understand the circumstance. So Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? What would you like me to do? How would you like to see this problem solved?" It's very similar to what Jesus will say to blind Bartimaeus in Mark 10:51. Yep. What do you want me to do for you? He says, "Tell me what you have in the house. Let's work with what we've got." And she said, "Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." Then he said, "Go outside and borrow vessels from all your neighbors, and empty vessels, and not too few. Then go in and shut the door behind you, behind yourself and your sons, and pour into all these vessels, and when one is full, set it aside. Okay? So take all these vessels and bring tons of empty vessels. Now, what he's doing is forcing her to trust here. You see, this is what's interesting about when you study miracles. Some miracles required no faith at all on behalf of the person who received the miracle. How much faith does a dead person have? They're dead. But yet Jesus raised 3 of them. Other times, there are conditions, right? He puts something on the eyes and you have to go do what? Go wash in the pool. And so, some of these miracles are about testing their trust in God's provision. And it's possible that after losing her husband, who was a prophet, that she could have been. We have a tendency when things go bad, there may be some super spiritual people who never have this thought cross their mind. I'm just not one of them. But when things are going bad, sometimes you look at it and go, what in the world is God doing in this mess? Like, I know He's good, but I'm kind of at my limit here, in my understanding of that. I don't really see that. And so here, what he's doing, so this is what I'm getting at. When he tells her, go get vessels, and he says, and not a few, how is he testing her faith? Yes. So if she has no trust, she's just going to go grab a handful of jars and just pour out oil into the handful of jars she gathered. But if she has trust in provision, she's going to scrounge up every single jar she can find, which obviously is what she does. Okay? So in verse 5 it says, so she went from him and shut the door behind herself and her sons, and as she poured, they brought vessels to her. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another. Then the oil stopped flowing. She came and told the man of God, and he said, go sell the oil and pay your debts, and your sons can live, you and your sons can live on the rest. Must have been a lot. If we're covering debts, and then her and her sons can live for the foreseeable future on the amount of money they're making. Okay? Now here she is in a struggle, and this reminds us of what the psalmist said in Psalm 68 in verse 5, something that's all throughout Scripture, that God has a special place in His heart for orphans and widows. He has a special place in His heart for people who are marginalized, especially in that society we're marginalized. Our society has its issues, but its treatment of people on the margins is far superior to almost anything you'll find in the rest of the world, and even in the history of the world. But here you see God concerned with her and her needs. Nothing was too small. Now, what does this remind you of in Elijah's ministry? Exactly. The widow at Zarephath in 1 Kings 17, verses 8 through 16, he comes upon her as a widow, and she's gathering sticks to cook a last meal so that she and her son can die because they're going to starve to death. And Elijah says, no, go and make me something, and I'll make sure that we don't run out of oil at all. And every day there was enough oil and flour there to eat continuously. And so you see this miracle where God is taking care of these women, and He's also sending a message that Elisha is walking in this same path that Elijah is, and so he's one that should be taken seriously. All right. Any questions or anything on that? All right, let's think about the Shunamite woman here. So Shunam is in the tribe of Issachar, Joshua 19 and verse 18. And Issachar is going to be like, if you're looking at a map, it's going to be southwest of the Sea of Galilee. So it says, one day Elisha went to Shunam, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged him to eat some food. So she's supporting him, taking care of him in his ministry, which is something that you see even in the New Testament when Luke 8, 1 through 3, Jesus received a good deal of his financial support from women. It wasn't men, it was women who financially supported him to a large degree. I'll just leave that there and let it challenge cultural stereotypes, okay? So she urged him to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. So it became a continual thing. You know, if you're ever through the area, you got a door, you got a place to eat, okay? So she said to her husband, verse 9, "Behold, now I know that this is a holy man of God who is continually passing our way. Let us make a small room on the roof with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that whenever he comes to us, he can go in there." And so she's suggesting that they construct a room on the top of their house, make an addition, so to speak. The top of their houses, their flat roofs, were places where they commonly would recline, kind of like we do back porches or front porches or, whichever porch you choose to sit on. And so she's proposing making a place for him to stay to make him more comfortable. They're not as well known today, but in generations past in America, a number of people, a number of church members had in their homes what they called Elisha rooms. If a preacher came to visit to hold a meeting for an extended period of time, they had a room set aside, or even sometimes a separate building set aside so that the visiting preacher could stay, or something along those lines, or somebody was coming through doing mission reports or something along those lines. And so here she is, she's providing for him. And what is happening is Elisha is traveling a circuit, okay? And so he goes to a number of different places the way that we saw in 2 Kings chapter 2 when they're making that journey, Elijah's final journey. There's a circuit of cities that he goes to, and Shunam, he seems to pass through Shunam in part of that circuit, okay? Verse 11, one day he came there, and he turned into the chamber and rested there. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Call this Shunamite." And when he had called her, she stood before him, and he said to him, "Say now to her, see, you have taken all this trouble for us. What is to be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army?" Now what we're seeing, sidebar incidentally here, is we're seeing hospitality. We're seeing the goodness of a person taking care of other people. But what we see in Elijah is also how to receive hospitality. How to receive hospitality. You know, hospitality sometimes is very much rejected in our culture. And it's because of our pride. No, I can't let you pay for that. Why? Because I'm a man, I take care of my family, and I have to cover it, and I always have to cover it. Or we find a way to cheap shot it. I remember a meal we were out to eat with a group of people, and a successful business owner was a part of that table, and very nonchalantly, no attention to himself. He just simply told the waitress to bring the whole check to him. I don't know what it was. It was probably $300 or $400, to be honest with you. And then when it came time to pay, and the other people had been informed that somebody had already taken care of it, other people began to wonder out loud, I wonder how you're going to write this off on your taxes. I still get mad thinking about it. So I went to him and I said, let me say something to you that no one else at that table seems capable of saying. Thank you for paying for my food. I'm not less of a provider. I'm not less of an individual because you chose to show hospitality to me and to my family. We're sick and we're down. And somebody offers to help us. Many times we have this tendency that says, no, I got it. Even though we're stressing out about it ourselves. No, I got it. I've been there. At the first place we preached, I'd gotten really sick, and we lived on a couple of acres, and it took hours to take care of the yard and things along those lines, and I physically could not get to it. I couldn't do it. And one of the deacons there, one of my close friends, he came to me and he said, do you need me to mow your yard? And everything inside of me wanted to say no to him. I can do that. I got it. Because that's who we are, right? We just push through. But you know what? I was reminded of in that moment, that's my pride. I need to humble myself and allow myself to be helped. How can I talk about helping people and telling people they need to seek out help if I'm not willing to seek it out and to receive it when I need it? And so Elijah is showing in this, when he's not offering to kind of repay her in the sense of, I feel bad, so I feel like, to kind of even up the score, let me do something nice, prophetic for you. He's saying, you've done all this for me. I can at least do some small gesture for you to express my appreciation for what you've done. Not try and pay you back, not try and one-up you, and so we're back on even keel here. I just want to show a token of appreciation. That's it. Okay? So, this is what he says when he said, would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? Can I talk to someone influential? Can I get you, a lot of things could be involved in this. And so, can I get a favor done on your behalf? And she answered, I dwell among my own people. She's like, I'm well off. I live with my family. I don't really have a lot of the same needs that other people have. Now, it's not always going to go that easily for her. We'll run into her again, actually, in chapter 8, and she won't be in as good a financial position at that time. But that's her response. I don't really need anything like that at this moment. And he said to her, what then is to be done for her? Gehazi answered, well, she has no son, and her husband is old. He said, call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the doorway, and he said, at this season, about this time next year, you shall embrace a son. And she said, no, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your servant. But the woman conceived, and she bore a son about that time the following spring, and as Elisha had said to her. And so she doesn't need anything financially. She doesn't need any favors. She doesn't need, And so they come up with this idea, the one thing that apparently they were not able to do naturally was to have a child. And so let's bless her with a child. And of course, at the front end, she seems somewhat skeptical, right? Don't get my hopes up, basically. Don't lie to me. Don't get my hopes up. Okay? Infertility is a very touchy and emotional issue. And, as people go through that, many times they come to a point where they have to kind of close the door on that idea. That's just not going to be in the cards for us. And you can kind of see that in this woman, right? Where she's saying, no, it's not going to, don't get my hopes up. It's not going to happen. And Elisha says to her, yeah, it's going to happen about this time next year. And the following spring, and this reminds you of Genesis 18 with Sarah. And she ends up having a son. And in that culture especially, okay, she's extremely wealthy, and so her land and all of her wealth is going to go to somebody else in the family line. Some distant relative is going to take over those things. But now that she has a son of her own, her name and her husband's name continues in Israel, and so it's a very important point of pride for Israelites. And so blessing her with a son was obviously a tremendous gesture for her. All right. Any questions or anything about that? We're not going to launch into the next section, even though it's related, just because time. Because then something is going to happen in this next section, as you know, to this son, and that will lead to Elisha performing another miracle, which is the raising of her son from the dead. And again, another, sometimes we think of miracles and, they were always easy, or they were always instantaneous. That's not real. That's not reality. Some miracles took a little time. You had to go through some of the process. And that's what we're going to see here. And it may seem peculiar to you as you read it, but stick with it, and you'll see it's very similar to the first side, the first widow in chapter 4, and the testing of her faith. There's some similarities between that and what's going to happen here. So, if not anything else, then I guess we're done. Next week I won't be here next week, but the next week we'll pick up there talking about this.